Okay, this is the blind spot of the day, number 37, wishing and willing harm. So if you are seeing this sigil, you most likely are totally unaware that you are actually wishing harm on others and or directly or indirectly trying to punish them. It is natural when we have been hurt to want to hurt others. What we are actually doing when we wish harm on someone is attempting to force them into a state of empathy. Even if it seems as though we are trying to push them away, we are actually trying to bring them closer. Compassion naturally arises as a result of relating to someone's suffering. All we must do in order to feel compassion and know what action to take is to relate to their pain. We are trying to force people into the state in order to become connected to them instead of separate, which is what we feel when someone causes us pain. We are trying to force people into this state in order to stay safe in our relationships and to feel a sense of justice and fairness so we can escape from the resentment that we feel. You punish in order to establish a sense of control in a situation where you feel out of control. You punish in order to establish a sense of fairness because you feel wronged, which is to escape from resentment. You punish to try to get people to comply so that they don't do something again. But the problem is, punishment doesn't work. When you punish, which is to introduce a negative stimulus, a person doesn't usually avoid doing that behavior that you want them to stop doing. Instead, they avoid the source, which is you, from that negative stimulus. This means they still do the behavior, they simply do it behind your back. If you're looking at this sigil, whether you want to admit it or not, you feel hatred. It may feel very hard for you to admit to this because it makes you feel bad and wrong as a person. Hatred is perhaps the most extreme form of vibrational resistance to something. It is resistance to the degree that one wishes to destroy the thing that is perceived to be causing the pain. The perception of threat causes hatred. The perception that something or someone in your life diminishes something you hold dear causes hatred. A threat is something that is likely to cause danger or damage. In other words, it is something that is likely to hurt you. When a person feels as if they are in the presence of threat, they feel fear, and that fear is quickly converted into anger, which is a state of defense. Hatred is the human ego in a state of defense. When we find ourselves hating something, the question that we must ask ourselves are, what threat does this thing pose to me? How is it hurting me? What am I afraid of? If you're seeing this sigil, you must become aware of your resentment. Resentment is a state of being in pain as a result of perceiving that you have been treated wrongly, unfairly, and unjustly. One of the main challenges as far as resentment is concerned is that it is immediately converted into distrust. When you feel like you have been treated unfairly, unjustly, and wrongly by someone, you have learned that you cannot rely on that person to take care for your best interest. And so, you do not trust them, right? This bitter distrust is usually what people are feeling in someone when they say that person can let go of resentment. It is easier to let go of something painful in the past that does not have a big negative impact on the present or the future. However, resentment often involves being treated unfairly in a way that does have such a negative impact. Ask yourself honestly, am I really resentful towards myself because of my role in the situation where I ended up being treated unfairly? For example, perhaps I got raped after drinking too much and blacked out. Perhaps the resentment towards the other person is a way to avoid the resentment I have towards myself for drinking so much that I let my guard down and now I cannot trust myself. Often our resentment towards others is a disguise or way of avoiding facing the resentment we have towards ourselves. Fair versus unfair, wrong versus right are subjective perspectives, but for the sake of your understanding, there are circumstances where a person has felt like they were treated unfairly when in fact they were treated fairly. And there are circumstances where a person perceives themselves to have been treated unfairly when in fact they were treated unfairly. Either way, state of being called resentment is present. Acceptance is a key part of letting go of resentment, because if resentment is present, it means you cannot accept something. Don't confuse acceptance of something with adopting something as your preference or endorsing it. Take a look at the situation that is causing you to feel resentful and ask yourself, what am I unwilling to accept about the situation? Why am I unwilling to accept that? If I accept that, what would it mean, or what bad things would happen? If you see in this sigil, number 37, you are being called to deal with your powerlessness differently. You are preoccupied with thinking about the causes and the consequences of your distress and leveling the score by hurting the other person instead of focusing on solutions to your distress. The decision to look for solutions to the distress and solutions for how to make the present or future different in a positive way turns your focus in a different direction, a direction that will lead to no results. Now is the time to clearly see how the state of being through understandably is negatively affecting your life and is preventing you from taking the actions that will bring about positive changes. So close your eyes to imagine the long-term effects down the road if that resentment was not altered, but stayed the same and got worse. What would happen long term if you kept focusing against another person instead of focusing in the direction of what you want? For example, if I resent my spouse, I can see that I have no desire to make love with them. And so my drift apart, and he or she or I may seek another partner. When we feel resentment, it is an indication that an aspect of us feels like a victim. That aspect needs to be acknowledged and cared for and validated. But you will find that once you genuinely care for the part of you that feels like a victim, looking for any way that you were responsible in the situation will have an interesting side effect. You will no longer feel powerless in relation to the other person. This means you need to take responsibility and take it into your hands to learn that lesson and act differently in the future. Just avoid slipping into self-blame and, by doing so, making matters worse. What you are wanting will come as a result of stopping being against them and start being for yourself. If you're seeing the sigil, once you genuinely care for the part of you that feels like a victim by patching its wounds, remember, not by destroying the person who wounded it. You are being called into a space of compassion. There is nothing harder than cultivating compassion for something that has hurt you. This step should never be done prematurely. If you try to force yourself to find compassion for the person who you feel hurt by, it is abusive. This has to be something you genuinely want to look for, not so that you can feel like a good person or do what is right because you are ready to stop the terrible feeling of tension that the resentment and need for requital creates. When we feel compassion, we feel sorrow and understanding and concern for the suffering of someone or something else. And having that shared commonality of pain and therefore sorrow and concern for them then compels us to alter our perspective, feelings, and actions towards that thing. It causes forgiveness to naturally occur within you. Compassion immediately arises when someone experiences pain that we relate to. Compassion naturally arises as a result of relating to someone's suffering. Therefore, all you must do in order to feel compassion and know what actions to take towards that thing is to deliberately look for how you relate to their pain. It just might set you free. Have a good day and night.